Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, we can get started. So my name is Welker. I'm a cloud solutions engineer here at Right Brain Networks. Have experience in a handful of logging platforms and solutions that we've used across many projects here. But before we get started here, anybody else who wants to participate on the call, would you like to just give a brief intro?
Yeah, my name's Wortinger. I'm also a cloud solutions engineer with Right Brain Networks. Some experience based on prior jobs as well as current jobs, just different solutions for different projects.
All right, thank you.
And I'm Morgan Worgess-Carveth, also a cloud solutions engineer here at Right Brain Networks.
Great. Yeah, so today's topic is about centralized logging. And I think in addition to that, monitoring as well is kind of coupled with that topic. But yeah, this is what we'll be covering here today on the Great Lakes Tech Talks. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Primarily, we're focusing, I think, on third-party solutions, but I think third-party can be kind of a general term overall. I think of AWS kind of as a third party itself. That does allow for you to kind of roll your own solution and however you see fit. They have some native services such as CloudWatch and CloudTrail, and more so even TimeStream can be used as kind of a method for logging nowadays, in addition to the OpenSearch and Elasticsearch components as well, and Grafana for visualizations. But that all kind of ties together, I think, in order to provide some sort of solution. Really, I mean, what are we trying to do with logs, right? We're trying to kind of capture event-driven data via various warning levels. We generally have needs such as we want our logs to be we want them to be consistent. We want to have availability to write the logs as needed. We want that to be at an overall, we want a high amount of availability and uptime with our solution, and we need backup solutions overall. I think in the event that our primary solution fails. So I guess either Morgan or Phil, what has your guys' experiences looked like? What kind of solutions have you used in the past? Is there anything that you prefer, like a solution you prefer over one another, or anything you kind of want to add to just that little tidbit there? And I can start. I mean, I've just to kind of kick it off a little bit, the coolest one I feel like we've used recently was on a client that had medical data. They needed a logging platform as well as a visualization bit. So I know one of my coworkers, Jason Brown, and I had written a TimeStream logger, which was effectively a Lambda layer at first, which then we kind of spun off into a package that we could include for code writing and service and ECS. I thought that was a really great way of kind of catching application level logs. As in their need, they had medical messages being sent pretty and quite a high volume, I would say. So we needed a way to capture that data, write it to TimeStream, And from there, we were able to incorporate Grafana as kind of a visualization layer in order to kind of do a proof of concept that we could build out tables as well as graphs that showed various levels of messages and whether or not we were seeing failures or successes in the environment. And I thought that was a really cool just kind of proof of concept that we had developed for them at the time. But yeah, do you guys have any cool stories you want to share?
Go ahead,
Or
Morgan.
you can go. I was gonna say, I've become more of a fan of CloudWatch and some of the abilities that are available within that. For a long time, when using logs, I basically would just have things shipped to a syslog and then use kind of grepping abilities to search through for what I needed. But with CloudWatch, the ability to set up the alarms and alerts, I swear I can speak, to keep an eye on things in real time and also be able to visualize using the custom metrics they have available has made it a lot simpler to track down certain issues or keep an eye on things that we may not want to regularly be manually checking for. I've also had some experience working with Grafana, and I think that helps a lot with visualizing in like non-AWS environments and services, being able to see in real time all of the information going through parsed in a more usable format than you may get just from raw logs themselves.
I definitely agree with the CloudWatch alarms component on that. Like those are just, I think, instrumental in, kind of filtering out data and being notified if, anything in the an environment is occurring. Like you could keep it as basic of, if there are error logs present, notify on that. If there's, specific thresholds that maybe we're logging, we want to alert on, such as if like there's like degraded performance or something like that. Even with the CloudWatch metrics, that's something we want to be aware of and notified on. So I've seen cool things with like people incorporating that into even like PagerDuty or Slack, for example, or Teams. Just like having channels set up for notifications in the event that a CloudWatch alarm is triggered. I know there's a lot of really interesting things you can do with that and a lot of integrations. And yeah, I'd say CloudWatch in general is a great solution for the majority of use cases. That's my general understanding as well.
And I agree. The integration with other services was relatively easy to put together. I set up a Teams and Slack notification based on CloudWatch earlier this year, and it was much simpler to do than I feared it would be going into the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know I was recently working on an application for a client as well, and I thought it just making use of the AWS SDK itself within your application is a possibility. So as long as the task role that in the event that you're running on ECS in a container, say like your task role has permissions to interact with CloudWatch. If you give it the permission, you can have your application itself create like a log stream. So in that use case, they had a variety of sites within their application, and each site had its own CloudWatch log stream that was able to cater to just that site's logs. And I thought that was kind of a really neat use case overall, kind of adapting the application itself to use the AWS SDK was just natural, rather than having something logged to standard out or logged to a file itself, and then having something like syslog or rsyslog pick it up and an agent write it to CloudWatch. There's a lot of cool things you can certainly do with that service.
I would agree that one of my favorite things is just how usable it is across the platform. Anything can hook into it. You can hook back into it, send alerts, alarms. As you mentioned, Slack, Teams, different options. It's great. prior experiences, one of the other things I would like with another platform is Splunk. In one of our prior jobs, we had some Carrero devices that monitored, network traffic, looking for malicious things, filter out like that.
Mhm.
And it was nice having all of these options searchable within a single application that was also able to visualize and graph the data.
Mhm.
And Morgan can probably add a bit to this because he's also worked with those Splunk services at a prior job that we had.
Yeah, the granularity of searching available through Splunk was really nice. It was a little difficult to get the syntax and work out exactly how to write the queries initially, but once that was kind of figured out, you could get a lot of very specific data without too much trouble.
Yep, and I would argue it had more usability than like simple, well, I say simple, but grep regexing like a scribe server or something like that.
Okay.
Um,
Agreed 100%.
it was convenient if you had to search for an issue across, in this case, the network. With what we were doing, it was a lot easier to query all the devices at once and filter down than to grep, write your regex, rewrite your regex, rewrite it again. And just the convenience to also be able to be like, print this visualization as a PDF and share it around was really convenient.
Yeah, I've had a little bit of experience with Splunk. Mainly I was on the free version and I just had a couple servers and services writing to Splunk. So I didn't get to really fully utilize the filtering and routing of data within the Splunk data stream processor. But from what I did see of the service itself, it has been, it is great, and I know it's very powerful. I notice my understanding with that is that it is oftentimes maybe one of the more expensive options as well, but it's also one of the most powerful logging and monitoring solutions that are available.
Yeah, I believe I've seen the bill once in my prior time with that company, and it was fairly expensive,
Right.
but it was nice because it had, just a few seconds of delay for processing the messages as it received them. It handled network-wide sampling at a very efficient rate. It managed our backups. It managed updates for the service. It took a lot of the overall overhead management that you might have to do yourself with a on-site or custom solution, and just streamlined it.
Mm-hmm.
One of
Yeah.
those situations where unfortunately it may cost a little bit more, but it does a lot. It saves a lot of work in other places. So kind of balancing out the budgeting of time versus investment in the product.
Yep.
Definitely. And I could say that's true for like even say like a self-hosted like Elk solution. I mean, once you start incorporating Elk and you have Elasticache nodes, there is the human element of needing to manage that instance as you kind of, I mean, and in past experience as well, there is potentially going to be issue with sharding. So that may, require somebody full time in order to kind of manage that, properly size it, configure it, and monitor how much traffic you're getting. Because I know in the event of, you know, an application sending more logs than it should, that can easily cause issues in the environment, and days of downtime, or hours of downtime, as well as disruptions, lack of logs, so on and so forth. So you have the element there of somebody needing to manage and maintain that, which you're maybe are not considering up front. So something that is a fully managed service, such as Datadog or Splunk, so on and so forth, that certainly helps kind of justify those costs as well. And there's a lot of different elements you need to consider. But yeah, speaking towards like the differences in terms of a third party managed versus a self-managed solution, definitely having something managed via third party, such as like, even AWS CloudWatch. That's not something that you need to maintain. You just need to strictly write to. I think, those tend to be better solutions overall, and I think guarantee more uptime and availability, and just kind of the peace of mind that you ensure your logs are going to be there in the event of some sort of application failure or something like that.
Yep. And I mean, even in that vein, they take a lot of the overhead configuration out for you, other than like naming your log group and just making sure it has permission to write. In the example, like ECS, all your standard out, as long as it has that permission and just the association of a log group, you're gonna get everything you want in CloudWatch.
Mhm.
Out like, other than maybe some sort of custom standard out redirect within your application, like say it doesn't go to standard out,
Yep.
it sets up everything else up for you that you can just start to query.
But even for those items, you can configure the CloudWatch agent to monitor for other other paths as well. I think for the logs that don't go to straight to standard out.
Yeah, and that's fair. They also give you the client option, which I've used with one of our clients here,
Mhm.
mounting it as like a sidecar container and manually attaching it to logs that then just pipe to CloudWatch.
Mhm.
It's great because, as you mentioned, not everything is standard out. Sometimes it's just a log file, and having the availability to redirect that and still view it without having to jump into the container goes a long way in terms of timeliness. You're not spending time having to authenticate, look through the container, find the log, sort the log.
Definitely. Yeah, so I mean, in regards to logging as well, like, do you guys see like any best practices? I know something that's brought up quite frequently is like standardizing on one logging solution, or not to standardize on one logging solution across an entire organization. I've seen both, and I don't necessarily see pros or cons to standardizing on one solution overall, as long as there's a clear delineation between what solution should be used in a given scenario. So perhaps like an infrastructure and ops team may have their own elk stack or something like that, whereas all application logs should be maybe sent over to CloudWatch, for example. I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer there, as long as it's well documented and known.
I think that's going to come down to expected use cases.
Yeah.
At our prior job, we had, I think, like 3 or 4 different logging solutions, just pending what you wanted.
Mhm.
We had Scribe, we had Graylog, we had Splunk. We eventually removed Graylog. We eventually removed Scribe and replaced it with a different solution. And we just had different products and hardware piping to different services. And I believe those choices were effectively always made by the engineering team with what went where, but it also then required more knowledge to know how to access all the multiple services, different and I'm forgetting what's called, the different like syntaxing between each service and everything.
Mhm.
Ideally, I think personally it would be better to have a singular logging solution, maybe broken up into groups with different permission access levels, as opposed to expecting someone to have to know 3 or 4 different services, what's in those services, as well as how to accurately search every service.
That's a good point. Yeah, that it does. I mean, by having a singular service, you are kind of just needing one skill set across the organization rather than a multiple of them. And it's I think that's a good idea as well. Just having well-defined groups and permissions across the organization for whatever solution you choose.
I think that also helps with the management of the services overall as much as it's needed. That way you don't have, like, because in the previous job Phil and I had, we you would have different teams with different solutions, which kind of silo the knowledge of both managing the service and using the service. So when anyone from a different team, or sometimes even on the same team, you've got multiple different solutions available, that you'd have to either bug the people who manage or set the whole thing up to try and learn in the process, or you'd have to go digging on your own to figure out how to use each particular one. And if there's an emergency situation where you need to review things, that can cause a great deal of issues, because you've got the stress of trying to learn something you haven't used before, along with the stress of trying to fix an issue that's having an impact right in the moment. Now, on the other hand, I guess one of the benefits to using different solutions in different places is it seems like a lot of different logging solutions have particular benefits or things that they're better at than other ones. So depending on the type of data that you're feeding into it, or the way that data needs to be used, some solutions are going to be more applicable to different use cases than another one may be. So it's kind of a balancing act between how much how much work do you want to place on the people who are using the services to have to learn how to use them, versus the usability for the actual situations that you're implementing them for.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And like you said, yeah, that definitely feels like a balancing act there. There's certainly pros and cons to each. Do you want to take maybe a minute to talk about like auditing, or maybe some best practices with like how we should send logs? I know that like RBN, we've typically been going with a multi-account strategy. And I think that kind of caters well to the auditing level. And that's more so by, piping all logs from all accounts, such as like VPC logs, CloudTrail logs into, either a CloudTrail stream over in an auditing account, or just VPC logs in general, storing them within a singular account. I do think like that approach is a good design overall, because in the event that you are audited or you're needing to pass some sort of accreditation, that very well allows for somebody to get within the account and find everything that's necessary. I think that solution for like application logs can be a little bit more tricky, but in the event that you have properly defined groups and permissions, and you don't have, I guess that would maybe also cater towards, a single solution overall. It allows for an audit, say in the event of an audit, for that process just to go a little smoother to for the auditor itself. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
I would second what you said about having everything go to a single auditing account or single location.
Mhm.
The ease that you get out of having to look in just one place for logs or the information that you need far outweighs any of the issues you may run into getting them shipped to that particular location. I think it's a lot better to have everything in one spot, especially with if you have multiple accounts, the issues that you can run into trying to be signed into multiple AWS accounts at a single time if you have to correlate data between multiple different sources. Trying to have 3 AWS consoles open so I can look at logs from 3 different things in 3 different places is a much bigger hassle than having them all in one particular account where I can easily see everything next to each other, and also not have the overhead of running 3 different containers that have 3 different logins to AWS at the same time. I've noticed that can be a bit resource intensive on the browser.
Yeah, I would generally agree with that vein solely for that reason. It's more convenient to have everything accessible within the one login, the one browser, as opposed to either having to open, like, say, multiple private browsers, multiple browser containers, anything like that to compare data across account for different resources, pending what might be trying to communicate with what else.
Definitely. Great. I guess, is there any other topics you guys maybe had in mind, just regarding logging, or any general thoughts? The only other one I have in mind is really like, a failure destination. Something I think that's good to keep in mind is in the event that, yeah, your primary solution, if that was to fail, a log should still be deliverable. So in the event like where maybe there's an issue with Elasticsearch, or perhaps like your indexer, if you're using like Kinesis data streams or a data fire hose, if there's an event that data cannot be written to your primary destination, I think it's always a good idea to have a backup destination in mind. And I know that S3 can just be used in order to be to have like just object storage for that data overall for archival purposes, and later ingestion back into your primary stream. So I know that is something that I had to do recently, which was kind of retroactively stuff data from the backup destination into our primary destination. But just in the event that something like that happens, I think it's a good idea to design a solution with a backup in mind.
I think that's going to come down to whatever your primary solution is, expected uptime versus actual downtime is, and what your budgeting looks like. Because a lot of these services can get expensive. Just storing the data, constantly sending out the information, the bandwidth will build up, obviously pending the size of your network and what you're trying to send.
Certainly.
If budgeting's not an issue, then having multiple services available that you just say we take a single output and send it to two other services, chances are your bill is going to roughly double pending the cost. But at the same time, if those services typically never have any downtime, what would the reason be?
Certainly.
I do, however, favor maybe having some sort of localized on-site solution that's able to store recent data rather than everything as a whole. So maybe something that's able to keep like the last month or two worth of logs, and then either compresses and archives or just rotates it out would be a generally fine solution. You're then not necessarily having to worry about constantly sending off to another provider. While still retaining, at least in the case of an emergency, chances are you need something more recent than historic.
Mm-hmm. And I know with an on-site solution that can also be out of network. Like say if you're writing from Amazon, that could potentially be costly if you're sending a lot of data out of the network. There'd be transfer charges.
That's fair.
Back on site or something like that. So yeah, I think it's definitely something good to keep in mind. And if a budget allows and the cost of your data is worthwhile being backed up somewhere that's easily accessible, there definitely needs to be a conversation there. And there's definitely, within a company, you would know whether or not if that design makes sense. But yeah, definitely a good topic to bring up as well.
I know based on previous roles that I've had, I just kind of as a best practice always support, no matter how reliable the primary solution is, there always needs to be some form of backup, because disasters can happen no matter how good a service is. There's always the potential for something to be lost. And if it's data that cannot be lost, then the budget always needs to have something in place as a backup. If it's just something you're looking for in terms of, it'd be nice to have this data, but it's not absolutely required, then relying on a single source can be okay. But if it is data that cannot be lost, then you have to design some form of backup, just in case any number of completely unforeseen disasters or acts of God that can happen. There should always be some place else that you can get access to that data, even if you're just dumping raw logs into an S3 bucket so that at a later point when things are working again, you can then ship those logs off to your primary. But I've seen enough situations where backups were either considered to be too expensive or weren't adequately discussed or considered beforehand. And when the unthinkable happens, it can be an absolute nightmare and disaster.
Yes, and I think, yeah, definitely should be a part of your DR strategy. Logs should certainly be a part of that. And I think as well, for like environments where you have, a dev or test versus your prod environment, maybe your dev and test logs, those don't necessarily matter as much in the DR logging strategy, whereas you still need stuff from production.
Exactly.
Yeah. But we are running here at the top of the, or well, at, to our 30-minute mark. Is there anything that anybody else wants to add before we close?
No, I think I got out everything I was interested in saying.
I did as well.
Great, same here as well. So yeah, thanks for joining here, and yeah, I do appreciate that. Joe, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone.